Why was she even here? That was the first question in every man's eyes as the young woman walked across the sun-baked concrete of the SEAL range at. Civilian clothes, no patches, no uniform. Just a quiet presence where only hardened operators belonged. "Are you lost, ma'am?" Master Chief called out, his tone a mixture of authority and condescension. The others chuckled. 12 SEALs stood at the firing line, their rifles ready, their eyes fixed on her with the easy confidence of men who knew this was their territory. She didn't answer right away. She just kept walking, her gaze sweeping across the immaculate range, the concrete benches, the ballistic calculators, the weather flags snapping in the breeze. To anyone else, it was just a training facility. To her, it was something else entirely. But pressed again. This area is for qualified military personnel only. The men smirked. They'd seen visitors before, administrators, tourists, dignitaries curious about what Navy SEALs did behind the gates, but none of them had ever walked straight onto the range like they belonged there. If Emma felt out of place, she didn't show it. Her movements were unhurried, her shoulders straight, her expression unreadable. At 27, she had learned the quiet power of silence. Sometimes, silence spoke louder than rank. "Gift shops back at the main building," one of the SEALs added with a grin. Another pointed her toward the safety line. "You can watch from there, ma'am. These rifles aren't for show and tell. They'll break bones if you don't know what you're doing." Still she didn't answer. She just stood for a moment, listening. Because that's what Emma always did first. Listen, watch, observe. People gave away more than they realized when they thought no one important was paying attention. And the men talked, they spoke of the record. Shot 1,200 meters 10 years ago, the perfect conditions, the legendary day that had never been repeated. Every week operators tried to match it, every week they failed. They spoke of the variables, the wind, the heat mirage, the air pressure. They spoke of the pressure, the psychology of firing a shot that lived in legend. They spoke with reverence, almost worship. Emma said nothing, but her eyes flicked to the distant target shimmering in the desert heat. She studied the flags. She counted the seconds between gusts. She noted the way the mirage bent light just slightly, enough to trick even skilled eyes, and in her mind she calculated. One by one the men fired. Rifles cracked like thunder, the sound rolling across the facility. The bullets screamed downrange, each attempt falling just short of history. 4 inches left, 6 inches high. Close, 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 but never perfect. Nodded solemnly after the 12th miss. This is why it stood for a decade. You need everything, weather, shooter, equipment, even luck. You don't just walk up and break a record like that. And that was when she finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Excuse me, would it be possible if I tried?" The laughter was immediate, shook his head with amusement. "Ma'am, this isn't a hobby rifle. It's .50 caliber, weighs 35 pounds, kicks harder than anything you've touched. It'll put you flat on your back." "Recoil alone can injure you," Brooks added. "This isn't a place for tourists." But Emma didn't move away. She didn't flinch. She just looked at the weapon, then back at the target. Calm, steady, silent. Tried to soften his tone. "Ma'am, this isn't about curiosity. These rifles require certification and years of training. It's not safe for." And then she picked it up. No hesitation, no fumbling. She lifted the as if it were a familiar companion, her hands checking the chamber, her eyes settling naturally behind the scope. The silence that fell was instant, heavy, undeniable. Someone whispered, "Holy shit." Her stance was textbook, her movements efficient, nothing about her screamed beginner. Narrowed his eyes. "Ma'am, have you used systems before?" She answered without looking up, "Some." That was all, just one word, but the way she said it, quiet, almost dismissive, told the truth. This was no first time, this was muscle memory. Still unwilling to believe, gestured toward the 600-meter target. "Try that first, work your way up." But Emma's scope was already shifted farther, to 1,200 meters, to the target that had mocked them all morning. "I'd like to try the record shot," she said simply. For a moment no one spoke. The only sound was the wind brushing across the range. Then's voice, measured, deliberate. "That's an extremely difficult shot. Professionals with years of experience can't hit it. Are you sure?" "I understand." She was already adjusting the scope, already compensating for what she had seen in every miss before hers. She dialed windage, adjusted elevation, corrected for mirage. Her breathing slowed. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. Brooks stepped forward, concern etching his face. "Ma'am, there's no shame in starting closer. That shot carries a weight, the pressure alone." But she wasn't listening anymore. In that moment the noise of the world fell away. The condescension, the laughter, the disbelief, it all faded. She had lived with it before. Every room she entered, every briefing, every mission where someone doubted her because of her quiet, unassuming presence. Ignored, underestimated, forgotten. But silence was her ally. Silence gave her time to see what others missed. And right now, silence gave her the space to breathe, to align, to prepare for the impossible. Her lips moved in barely a whisper, not words anyone could catch, just a rhythm, a calm she carried from years in the field. "Shooter ready," she announced at last. The range went still. The SEALs leaned in, curiosity sharpening into something else. Arms crossed, studied her form. Once dismissive, now frowned with dawning recognition. Brooks shifted uneasily, sensing something he couldn't explain. The flags danced, the mirage shimmered, the desert heat pressed in heavy. Emma exhaled, and her finger closed on the trigger. The cracked like thunder. A plume of dust and debris burst from the distant 1,200-meter target. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The sound seemed to echo longer than it should have, rolling through the dry air as if the desert itself wanted to hold on to the memory. Through the spotting scope, the range officer's voice came out strangled, hesitant, like he was afraid to believe what he saw. "Confirmed hit, 1,200 meters, dead center." Silence followed, not the casual kind but the heavy, weight of history kind. A silence that comes when something impossible has just been undone right in front of you. Emma lowered the rifle with steady hands, her expression unreadable. No grin, no boast, no smugness, just calm. She set the weapon down as if the moment hadn't just shifted the ground under their feet. Finally broke the silence, did she just? But the words died in his throat. Because yes, she had. She had equaled record on her very first attempt. The SEALs stared at her, their earlier amusement gone. It was replaced by something they rarely felt inside their own house, shock. Stepped forward, his voice slower now, his confidence tempered by disbelief. "Ma'am, what exactly is your military specialty?" Emma's reply was almost too soft. "Counter-sniper operations, 75th Ranger Regiment." She paused, her gaze lifting toward them, steady and controlled. "I'm here to brief your team on an urgent mission." Before the words could even settle, the base siren screamed to life. Red lights pulsed across the facility, a warning that turned every operator rigid in an instant. "Alert, all SEAL personnel, immediate deployment," came the broadcast over the loudspeakers. The casual atmosphere evaporated. The laughter, the competition, the banter, it all died. The men who only moments ago had been joking about cameras and gift shops now snapped to attention, their instincts honed for war. Commander Sarah Hayes strode onto the range, her face grim, her voice raised to cut through the alarms. "Terrorist organization has captured 12 American relief workers in Afghanistan. Intelligence indicates they're being held in a fortified mountain compound with multiple sniper positions. Mission briefing begins now." Every operator straightened. The transition was seamless. Range competitors one moment, warfighters the next. But Emma didn't flinch. She stepped forward with quiet authority, her earlier silence now transformed into something else, something earned. "Commander," she said evenly, "Lieutenant Emma, Rangers. I believe I'm your designated counter-sniper for this operation." Hayes checked her tablet, her eyes flicking back and forth. Then she nodded. "Confirmed. Lieutenant will provide long-range fire support. She will eliminate Overwatch threats during extraction." The SEALs turned toward her again. This time there was no laughter, no dismissal, no "ma'am, you're welcome to watch." His voice broke the tension, softer now. "You're here for the Afghan mission." Emma nodded once. "Roger that. Intel indicates 8 sniper teams positioned in elevated terrain around the compound. Standard assault will result in unacceptable casualties unless those positions are neutralized first." Her tone was calm, professional, matter-of-fact, but inside a flicker of unease stirred. She had walked into enough missions to know what failure looked like. 12 hostages killed, 12 Americans who would never make it home. She carried that weight, even as she masked it beneath her discipline. Studied her closely, the skepticism drained from his voice. "Ma'am, how do you plan to engage 8 snipers, unknown ranges, mountainous terrain?" She glanced at the lying across the bench, the rifle still warm from the shot that had stunned them all. "By doing what I just did, Chief." Her voice carried steel, "but with targets that shoot back." No one questioned her again. 3 hours later, the night sky over-roared with the sound of helicopter rotors. 4 MH-60 Black Hawks lifted into the darkness, their lights dimmed, their crews silent. The mission had begun. Emma sat in the lead aircraft, her rifle across her knees. Around her, SEAL Team 6 checked gear, tightened straps, reloaded magazines. The men who had doubted her now sat in silence, stealing glances, recalibrating their understanding of the quiet woman who carried herself like she belonged in any room. The flight was long, 6 hours across hostile skies, over borders where they weren't welcome, into the thin air of Afghanistan's jagged mountains. Every mile carried its own risk: anti-air defenses, weather, fatigue. Emma stared into the green haze of her night vision, her eyes fixed on the valley growing closer in the distance. The compound came into view, nestled between ridges, surrounded by rocky high ground that gave perfect to enemy sharpshooters. She could already see it, the geometry of death laid out in the terrain. The pilot's voice crackled through comms. 6 minutes to target." Emma shifted into preparation mode. Her breathing slowed. Her hands moved with calm precision, checking chamber, optics, scope settings. She ran through the sequence in her mind. 8 positions, 8 rifles waiting in the dark. Her heart beat steady, but not because she felt no fear. Fear was always there. The trick was learning to breathe through it, to carry it without letting it crack your focus. The commander's voice filled their headsets. Primary objective, extraction of hostages. Secondary, elimination of leadership. Enemy snipers are priority 1. Emma leaned forward, her eye to the scope. The world narrowed. Through glass and magnification she found them, shadows on ridges, glints of optics, faint shifts of movement. They were waiting, patient, predators. 2 minutes. The helicopter banked, leveling them into position. The altitude bit at her lungs, thin mountain air that would change everything about ballistics. She calculated instinctively: air pressure, temperature, crosswinds cutting between ridges. 30 seconds. She exhaled, steady. Her world was her breathing, her sight picture, her finger brushing the trigger. "In position for sniper elimination," she reported calmly. What happened next would be told, and retold across SEAL history. Her first shot punched through the night, striking the sniper on the main approach before he could even shoulder his rifle. Her second shot cut down the marksman lining up on the landing zone. Her third eliminated the one covering hostage escape routes. Her fourth neutralized a sniper trying to reposition. Her fifth took the one watching the rear exit. Her sixth silenced the man directing enemy fire from above. Her seventh found the most dangerous threat, 1,400 meters away, with a perfect view of the valley. Her eighth removed the last pair of eyes guarding the compound. 8 shots, 8 kills, less than 3 minutes, all from a moving helicopter in combat conditions that most shooters would call impossible. "Sniper positions neutralized," she said over comms, her voice as calm as if she had just called in weather conditions. "SEAL teams have clear approach vectors." And just like that, the battlefield shifted. The helicopters dropped. Ropes snapped taut. SEAL operators flooded into the valley, unopposed by the overwatch that should have cut them down before they touched dirt. Gunfire erupted, brief and violent, but without sniper eyes guiding defenders, it was chaos for the enemy. For the SEALs, it was precision. Controlled, disciplined, overwhelming. Within minutes, the compound was breached, hostages located, terrorist leaders eliminated. Emma never left her post. Her world remained her scope, her trigger, her role, quiet, unseen, essential. Each time a defender tried to climb a ridge for higher ground, she stopped them. Each time an enemy raised a rifle toward a rooftop, her bullet reached them first. And then silence, the compound secure, the hostages safe, the mission complete. When the Black Hawks lifted them back into the night, Emma sat in the same calm posture she had carried all along, her rifle resting across her knees. Around her, SEAL operators exchanged glances. Not disbelief this time. Not doubt. Something heavier. Something closer to reverence. Leaned forward, his voice quiet, almost humbled. "Ma'am, what you did tonight, 8 snipers, combat conditions, moving bird, that isn't just marksmanship. That's redefining what's possible." Nodded, still shaking his head as if he needed to wake up from a dream. "That range shot this morning was impressive, but this was legend." Emma said nothing. She just cleaned her rifle with the same methodical calm she always had. Because for her, it wasn't about applause. It wasn't about proving herself to men who doubted her. It was about something simpler, something heavier. The 12 Americans alive in the cabin tonight. The ones who would see their families again because she had done her job. She leaned back against the vibration of the helicopter wall, her eyes closing briefly. The mission wasn't about records. It never had been. It was about lives. And sometimes, silence spoke louder than anything. The flight back to was quieter than anyone expected. Not because there was nothing to say, but because every man in that helicopter was still trying to understand what had just happened. They had been prepared for casualties. They had been ready to lose people. Every calculation, every briefing, every grim nod before takeoff had carried the shadow of that risk. But it hadn't happened. Not one man lost, not one hostage killed. And the reason sat across from them, silent, steady, her rifle resting across her knees. Emma didn't look around. She didn't meet their eyes. She simply cleaned her weapon with practiced motions, each stroke of the cloth as precise as her shots. For her, the night wasn't about glory. It was about responsibility. She carried the weight of those 12 civilians now, the invisible ledger she always carried after missions. Lives saved. Lives spared. Leaned forward at last. His voice carried none of the condescension from earlier in the day. It was lower, steadier, respectful. "Lieutenant, what you did tonight, 8 snipers, moving bird, combat conditions, that's not just skill. That's redefining what's possible." Emma didn't look up. She didn't bask in the compliment. She simply nodded once. "They were threats to my team. That's the job." Shook his head almost in disbelief. "You made it look easy, like you were reading their movements before they made them." Emma paused in her cleaning, her hands resting briefly on the metal of the rifle. For just a flicker of a moment, her silence felt heavier. There were things she could have said. About the training. About the nights spent in wind-blasted mountain ranges, practicing with no sleep, no warmth, no margin for error. About the times she had missed, and the cost those misses carried. But she said nothing, because sometimes silence was easier than memory. When the helicopters finally touched down the debrief began immediately. The briefing room was packed, SEAL operators, senior officers, support staff. The mission had been labeled near impossible, less than 30% chance of success. And yet here they all were, alive. Commander Hayes stood at the front, her voice steady but carrying an edge of awe. Lieutenant eliminated 8 enemy snipers from distances and conditions most would consider impossible. Her actions enabled the successful rescue of 12 American civilians. Without her overwatch, this mission would have ended in casualties. The room was silent at first, then the applause came, loud, unrestrained, echoing against the walls. Emma sat in the front row, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. Applause had never been her measure of success. She heard only the names in her head, the relief workers who would go home, the teammates who would see another dawn. That was what mattered. But for the men around her, something shifted that night. The woman they had once dismissed as a lost tourist was now something else entirely. Not just skilled, not just competent, but legendary. Rose slowly, his eyes fixed on her. The same man who had once waved her toward the observation line now stood with something almost like reverence. "Lieutenant, what you did goes beyond marksmanship. You made the impossible look possible." There was no arrogance in her reply, just quiet truth. Sometimes the difference between impossible and possible is preparation and a steady hand. The men around her absorbed those words in silence. After the briefing, walked her back to the range board. His hand brushed the plaque that bore his name, the 1,200-meter shot that had stood unchallenged for a decade. With a marker, he wrote slowly, "Record equaled by Lieutenant, 75th Rangers. Combat performance exceeded all expectations." The room grew quiet as the others watched. For some, it felt like history shifting under their feet. But Emma wasn't finished. She turned toward, her voice calm, almost casual. "Chief, if you don't mind, I'd like to try something before I leave." Frowned something. Emma's eyes lifted toward the far end of the range. Beyond the legendary 1,200-meter target stood a smaller, almost forgotten silhouette, an experimental marker, one that had never been considered practical, one that was more of a rumor than a test. 1,500 meters. Shook his head immediately. "Ma'am, that's beyond theoretical maximum for this facility. Targets are barely visible even through high-power optics." "I'd like to try anyway." Her words carried no bravado, no challenge, just the quiet certainty of someone who had already calculated every variable before speaking. The operators gathered again, not with laughter this time, but with sharp, professional curiosity. They knew what they were about to witness would be either spectacular failure or history rewritten. Emma lifted the once more. The massive rifle rested against her shoulder as if it belonged there. Her breathing slowed, her movements unhurried. She adjusted elevation, dialed windage, calculated drop. At 1,500 meters, the bullet's flight time would stretch seconds into eternity. Wind, temperature, air density, all of it mattered now more than ever. She settled into position. The range went silent, not even a whisper. Crack! The roared, the recoil driving back into her shoulder. The round tore through the air, crossing the distance like a question flung into the horizon. And then impact. The distant target disintegrated in a cloud of dust and debris, visible, audible, unmistakable. The spotter's voice broke, awe-strangling his tone. "Confirmed hit, 1,500 meters, dead center, new record." For the second time that day, silence drowned the range. Not mocking silence this time, not skeptical silence, but the kind of silence that comes when belief itself has to be rebuilt. Kane whispered first. "That was beyond anything we thought possible here." Brooks nodded slowly, his eyes still locked on the shattered target. 1,500 meters, single shot, That's not just a record, that's legend. Emma lowered the rifle, her expression unchanged. No smile, no victory cry, just the same quiet presence. Because for her, the shot wasn't about proving them wrong. It wasn't about etching her name into their board. It was about something deeper, about knowing the line between possible and impossible could always be pushed, and about proving, to herself as much as anyone, that silence and precision could shape history more than noise and pride ever could. Exhaled, shaking his head in disbelief, he finally spoke the words that every man on that range now knew were true. "Lieutenant, you didn't just visit us today, you changed us." Emma gave the faintest nod. Her eyes drifted back toward the horizon, where the dust from her shot still hung in the air. Sometimes the person you underestimate is the one who shows you what's been missing. Sometimes the visitor you dismiss is the teacher you never knew you needed. And sometimes breaking a record is only the beginning. What happens after silence shatters a record. For days, the range buzzed with stories of the woman who had come and gone like a ghost. Emma's name was whispered in corridors, repeated in after-action reports, etched into the training board where had once stood alone. But Emma herself did not linger on the glory. She did not smile when men offered handshakes, nor lean into the awe that followed her now. She kept moving quietly, one step to the next, because she knew the danger of legends. People start to forget the weight of the work that built them. The first sign of change came quickly. Operators who had once dismissed her as a tourist now leaned over notebooks, copying her adjustments, replaying her breathing techniques in their minds. They spoke of wind not just as a nuisance but as a language, a pattern that could be read if you had the patience. "Watch the flags the way she did," muttered one morning during training, his eye to a scope. "She saw shifts before they happened. She was calculating while we were guessing." Brooks nodded beside him, his rifle resting across the bench. She wasn't chasing the shot. She was building it, like it was already hers before she pulled the trigger. For men who had spent their lives being the best, admitting someone had done it better wasn't easy. But what Emma had given them wasn't humiliation. It was a glimpse into possibility. And possibility, once seen, could never be unseen. Weeks turned into months. The curriculum shifted. Where once the 1,200-meter record stood as a distant myth, new targets appeared farther out, painted into the dust of the hills. 1,500 meters, beyond. The impossible was now mandatory. Himself began teaching Emma's methods. He wrote them into the manuals. He drilled them into new candidates. Wind became a conversation. Mirage became a map. Silence became part of the training, not just quiet on the line, but the silence of the shooter's mind, the ability to drown out chaos until only breath and trigger remained. But Emma wasn't there to see most of it. Her life moved differently. While SEALs adjusted their doctrine, she was pulled back into the shadow work of the Rangers, missions that didn't make headlines, shots no one would ever know had been fired. She operated in Afghanistan, in Syria, in places even her teammates would never speak of. And each time she carried the same calm silence, the same weight. Yet no matter where she went, word of her spread. Not because she told it, but because men who had once doubted her now couldn't stop telling the story. The visitor who broke. The ranger who saved 12 with 8 shots. The ghost who made the impossible real. Legends grow fastest in whispers. And soon, Emma's techniques were not just SEAL curriculum but Marine training, Army doctrine, even Air Force manuals. She had become the uncredited instructor across branches, the unseen hand shaping a generation of shooters. But inside, Emma felt something different. Because while the world built a legend around her, she still carried the memory of silence, rooms where she had been ignored, eyes that had slid past her, voices that had told her she didn't belong. And though respect now replaced dismissal, she wondered if it was respect for her, or for the legend they had crafted from her actions. At night, in rare quiet moments between missions, she replayed the faces of those she had saved. The relief workers carried out of that Afghan valley. The teammates who had lived because she saw the sniper before he fired. Those memories steadied her. But she also carried other faces, ones she didn't talk about, the ones from years before, missions where her shot had come half a second too late, where silence had cost lives instead of saving them. Those were the memories that whispered in the dark. And so she carried two truths. To the world, she was the ghost sniper, the woman who shattered records and rewrote manuals. To herself, she was still the quiet lieutenant, fighting doubt with every breath, learning to live with the weight of silence. 6 months after the shot called her back. The range had changed. Targets stretched farther now, the hills dotted with markers at distances that had once been dismissed as fantasy. The benches were cleaner, the wind flags positioned differently, the spotting scopes upgraded. The entire facility had been reshaped by her influence. "You changed us," admitted as they walked the line. His voice was softer now, carrying not just respect but something closer to gratitude. "Your techniques, they're saving lives out there. Missions that would failed, we're seeing them succeed because of what you taught us." Emma listened quietly. She didn't need the words, but she respected the honesty in his tone. Stopped in front of the 1,500-meter marker, the one that still bore the scars of her shot. "That day, you showed us something we didn't think was possible. You reminded us that limits are just lines drawn by the people who came before." Emma's gaze stayed on the horizon, the same horizon she had stared at when she pulled the trigger. She didn't feel pride. She felt responsibility. Because if her shot had redefined limits, then every soldier who trained in her methods now carried a piece of her silence, her weight, into battle. She turned to at last. "Then make sure they understand it's not about records, it's about breathing, patience, discipline. Records are accidents, lives are the mission." Nodded slowly. He knew she was right. That night, Emma walked the range alone. The sun was sinking low, the desert air cooling as shadows stretched across the benches. She lay prone behind the once more, sighting not at any official target but at the distant horizon, where the earth seemed to meet the sky. And in that silence, she whispered words no one else would hear. Not a prayer, not a boast, just a reminder to herself of why she did what she did. Because sometimes silence isn't emptiness. Sometimes silence is where the truth lives. And the truth was this: the shot wasn't the legacy. The legacy was the lives saved because of it. What happens to a legend when the battlefield calls her back? Emma didn't live at. She passed through it, like wind across sand, felt, remembered but never lingering. Her life belonged to the shadows, to flights that took off at midnight and landed in places without names, to missions briefed in whispers and carried out in silence. While SEALs trained with her methods, Emma lived them. Afghanistan, Iraq, the Horn of Africa, Syria. Each new deployment carried her farther from the sterile perfection of a shooting range and deeper into the chaos of war. Her rifle was always there, cradled against her shoulder, an extension of her breath. But the rifle was only a tool. The real weapon was patience, the discipline to wait, to measure, to calculate, while others grew restless. And waiting was its own kind of torment. In one valley, she spent 37 hours prone on a ridge, eyes fixed through her scope, barely moving, her body aching as the sun blistered her skin and the cold night froze her bones. The target was a courier, thin, forgettable, carrying intelligence that could save or doom American lives. 37 hours of silence. 37 hours of waiting for one moment, one breath, one chance. When the courier finally appeared, Emma exhaled slowly. One trigger pull, one man down, and suddenly an entire unit walked into safety instead of an ambush. That was her reality. Not applause, not records, just moments. Lives saved because of silence. But war is never that clean. In another mission, her bullet found its mark, an insurgent sniper who had been waiting to kill Marines in a convoy. Her shot saved them, but as the dust cleared, Emma's scope lingered. A small figure ran into view. A boy, 10, maybe 11. He dropped to his knees beside the body, screaming soundlessly through the glass. Emma's breath caught. Her finger trembled on the trigger, though no shot remained. She forced herself to look away, but the image burned itself into her memory. That boy's grief would never leave her. That night, while her team slept, Emma sat alone cleaning her rifle. Her hands moved mechanically, but her thoughts were somewhere else. She remembered her father's words, long before she wore the uniform. "Every bullet has two stories, Em. The one you save and the one you take. Don't ever forget either." She hadn't, she never would. Her teammates didn't see the ghosts. They only saw the results. To them, Emma was flawless, a sniper who never missed, a guardian who made the battlefield safer. They spoke of her in mess halls, in hangars, in tents pitched under foreign skis. "Ghost saved us again last night. She took out 3 before we even hit the ground. I don't know how she does it. It's like she sees the shot before it happens." Her legend grew without her feeding it, and the more it grew, the less room she felt for her humanity. There were moments, rare and fragile, when the weight cracked her armor. After one mission in the mountains found her sitting apart from the team, her rifle across her knees, her shoulders hunched. He approached carefully. "You all right?" he asked. Emma didn't look up. 8 shots, 8 bodies. "You saved us." Her voice was barely a whisper, "and I ended them." Didn't know what to say. He was a warrior too, but for him the battlefield was different. He fought face to face, chaos to chaos. He didn't see the eyes in his scope. He didn't watch the stillness that followed. Emma did every time. And yet she kept going, because for every face that haunted her there were others, faces alive because of her discipline, families reunited, soldiers who came home, civilians who walked free. That balance was fragile, a ledger she never stopped calculating. Back home, the military continued to reshape itself around her shadow. SEAL snipers spoke her name during training. Marine instructors quoted her techniques. Even, once the record holder, admitted openly that Emma's silence had become the new standard. But Emma avoided the spotlight. She turned down interviews, declined ceremonies, refused medals beyond the bare minimum. She didn't need her name on walls. She needed the memory of lives saved to outweigh the ghosts of lives taken. One night between deployments, she stood again on the range. The stars stretched above her, the air cool, the benches empty. She lay prone with her, aiming not at targets but at the horizon. She whispered to herself, words no one else would hear. "This isn't about records, it's about dignity. It's about breathing when others can't. It's about silence when others scream." The shot she fired that night wasn't for practice. It wasn't for records. It was for memory, a reminder that even legends are built on quiet moments, on choices made when no one is watching. Because the world would remember her as the woman who broke the record, the ghost who saved 12, the sniper who made the impossible possible. But Emma remembered something else. She remembered being ignored at the range. She remembered being dismissed as a visitor. She remembered the boy crying over his father's body. And in those memories lived the truth. She wasn't a legend. She was a soldier, a human, a woman who carried silence because words would never be enough. The missions would keep coming. The targets would keep appearing. The shots would keep echoing through valleys and alleys and compounds. And Emma would keep breathing, keep calculating, keep carrying the weight. Because sometimes legends aren't chosen. Sometimes they're forged in silence, against the will of the one who bears them. And sometimes the truest strength isn't in the shot itself, but in living with the silence that follows. What happens when a soldier becomes more than a soldier? 6 months after the Afghan rescue, Emma's name had spread farther than she ever intended. Her techniques weren't just admired, they were doctrine. At Marine, instructors quoted her adjustments like scripture. At Fort Benning, Ranger candidates studied her methods as though she had carved them into stone. Everywhere she had walked quietly, her silence had left echoes. Called them the protocols, a set of teachings about wind, mirage, breathing, and patience. But Emma never wrote them down. Others did: SEALs who watched her movements, Marines who memorized her corrections, Rangers who pieced together her habits from fragments. Her ghost had become a manual. And yet she never felt ownership of it. Because while men and women trained on ranges, safe behind benches and spotting scopes, Emma lived where the protocols weren't theory, they were survival. In Syria, she spent a night pinned in rubble, her rifle balanced across a broken wall, while mortars cratered the street around her. She remembered's voice on the radio: "We can't move without you, Ghost. Find the eyes." She had found them. 2 snipers on rooftops scanning for SEAL movement, 2 shots, 2 collapses. Her team had advanced. The mission had succeeded. Back home, instructors retold that story as an example of battlefield calm. For Emma, it was memory, the taste of dust in her throat, the ringing in her ears, the smell of cordite and blood. She wondered if the people quoting her name ever realized that each story they told had a cost, that behind every protocol was a body, that behind every lesson was a life taken so another could be spared. But institutions don't remember the costs, they remember the results. And results were what Emma delivered. One evening she sat in a dim operations room, waiting for another briefing. Across the table, younger operators whispered, thinking she couldn't hear. "That's her. The one from... the one who cleared 8 in under 3 minutes." Emma kept her eyes on the map in front of her. She had grown used to the whispers, used to being a presence in a room before she even spoke, used to the weight of expectation pressing down before her rifle ever left its case. But expectation was a dangerous thing. Because legends aren't allowed to falter. Legends don't miss. Legends don't wake in the middle of the night with the sound of children crying in their ears. Emma did. She carried the ghosts of every shot. And the more the world turned her into myth, the lonelier she felt inside her silence. There were moments, brief human moments, when cracks showed. After one mission in the Hindu Kush, she returned to base bone tired, her shoulders aching from days of stillness. Found her alone, cleaning her rifle under a bear. "You did good out there," he said. Emma didn't look up. Good doesn't mean easy. He hesitated, then asked the question others were afraid to. "Does it get to you?" Her hands paused, cloth resting against steel. She thought of the boy in Afghanistan, the courier in the valley, the faceless shapes that had fallen through her scope. She thought of the ledger she kept in her head, the names she would never know, the weight that grew heavier with every mission. "Yes," she said finally, quiet, honest, "it gets to me." Didn't press. He just nodded and left her to her silence. And in that moment, Emma realized something rare. Someone had listened without asking her to be legend. But those moments were scarce. Most of the time, the world demanded she be more than human. When she walked into training halls, candidates stared like she was carved from stone. When she entered briefings, senior officers deferred to her scope as though it were magic. The weight of being myth pressed harder than the weight of her rifle. And yet she bore it, because she knew what it meant if she didn't. One night during a classified exercise, gathered SEAL snipers under the desert stars. Emma stood at the line in hand, students watching her every move. "You don't teach by words," said to them. "You teach by silence. Watch her, watch everything. Then ask yourself not how she shoots, but how she waits." Emma fired only once that night. A distant steel target rang out, the echo carrying across the desert. The students whispered in awe. But she knew the truth. The shot wasn't the lesson. The silence before it was. Afterward, a young sniper approached her nervously. "Ma'am, how do you do it? How do you stay calm when everything depends on you?" Emma looked at him, her gaze steady, her voice soft. I don't stay calm, I stay quiet, quiet enough to hear my breath, quiet enough to see what others miss. That's all. The young man nodded, writing her words into memory as though they were scripture. But Emma walked away knowing he had only heard half the truth. Because silence was not just her strength, it was also her prison. In the months that followed, Emma's assignments grew heavier. Missions where her presence was the difference between life and death. Missions where commanders said openly, if can't make the shot, this mission doesn't happen. She carried that responsibility without complaint. But late at night, staring at the ceiling of temporary quarters, she wondered who she was without it. Would anyone know her if she wasn't behind the scope? Would anyone listen to her voice if it wasn't calling, sniper neutralized over comms? And deeper still, was there a version of her that could exist outside the silence? She didn't know, she wasn't sure she wanted to. Because legends don't get to choose who they are. Legends are chosen by others, carved by whispers and records and stories retold until the person vanishes beneath them. And Emma was vanishing, slowly, quietly, like a ghost. How many ghosts can one soldier carry before the silence breaks? Emma asked herself that question every night, though never out loud. It came in flashes, in the stillness between missions, in the quiet moments when her rifle lay across her knees and the world around her finally went still. And the question returned the night she received the orders. Target: Eastern Europe. Objective: rescue a captured intelligence officer. Threat: multiple hostile sniper teams, fortified urban terrain, civilian population scattered throughout. Probability of mission success: less than 20%. Emma read the briefing in silence. Her pulse didn't quicken, her face didn't shift, but inside something tightened. This wasn't just another mission. It was a test, a razor's edge where her legend could collapse under its own weight. His voice cut into her thoughts. You're the difference. Without you, this op doesn't even get off the ground. She nodded once, understood. But later, when she sat alone in the dark, her fingers tracing the cold steel of her, she felt the weight press harder than usual. If I miss, if I falter, 12 men die. Another ghost joins me. The mission began under a moonless sky. Helicopters swept low over a shattered city, their blades chopping the night into fragments. Below, rooftops stretched like jagged teeth, perfect nests for enemy sharpshooters. Emma was strapped in tight, her scope already scanning through night vision. Every rooftop was a question, every shadow a threat. 3 minutes to drop, the pilot called. Emma's breathing slowed. She had trained for this, lived for this. But no training erased the memories pressing against the edges of her focus. The boy crying over his father's body, the courier collapsing in a valley, faces she would never forget. She pushed them down. Silence, she reminded herself, always silence. 2 minutes. Through her scope, movement flickered, glass catching moonlight, a figure shifting against brick. Enemy sniper, 800 meters. Crack. The man dropped before he even raised his rifle. Sniper 1 down, Emma reported calmly. The team below exhaled. But the city was alive with eyes. For every nest she cleared, another flicker appeared. Rifle barrels sliding out of broken windows, figures moving through rubble. Crack, crack, crack. Her shots fell like punctuation, cutting off threats before they could form sentences of violence. Sniper 3 down. Sniper 5 down. 6 down. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled between shots. She kept them steady on the trigger, but when she pulled away for a second, she saw it, the ledger in her mind growing heavier. And then the mission turned. One rooftop, farther than she had ever fired in urban combat, 1,200 meters across fractured buildings, wind tunneling through alleys, a hostile sniper with his scope already locked on the SEAL team below. Emma's breath caught. Her calculations raced, wind speed, distance, angle. But the shot was brutal, the window narrow, the risk high. If I miss, they die. Her finger hovered, her chest tightened. For the first time in years, doubt crept in like poison. And in that doubt, the ghosts returned. The boy, the courier, the silence that followed every shot. Her hands shook, her scope blurred. "Ghost, do you have him?" Voice over comms was sharp, urgent. Emma swallowed hard, she steadied her breath. Silence, she reminded herself, always silence. But silence wasn't enough this time. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She felt herself sinking under the weight of being legend, of being the myth they all trusted more than flesh and blood. For a heartbeat, she wasn't lieutenant, counter-sniper. She was just Emma, human, fractured. She whispered words no one else heard. "Steady, you're not shooting for the legend, you're shooting for them." Her finger squeezed. Crack! The distant sniper collapsed, his rifle clattering against the rooftop. "Sniper neutralized," Emma said, her voice calm again. But inside, she shook, because she knew how close she had come to freezing, how near she had been to breaking under the weight of her own silence. The mission continued, hostage recovered, enemy scattered, extraction complete. On paper, it was a success. But in Emma's mind, something had shifted. Later, back at base, found her sitting alone again, her rifle across her lap. He saw it in her eyes before she spoke, the crack in the armor, the tremor in the silence. "You saved them," he said. Emma shook her head slowly. "I almost didn't." He sat down beside her. For a long time, neither spoke. Then said, "Legends aren't made because they never falter. They're made because they stand up again when they do." Emma looked at him, her eyes tired but steady. "What if the silence breaks?" "Then you find a new one," answered softly. "Because silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of control, and that's what you are." Emma said nothing. She only looked down at her rifle, the metal glinting in the dim light. She thought of the shot she almost didn't take, the hesitation, the fear. And for the first time, she admitted to herself what she had never spoken out loud. The ghosts weren't just behind her, they were inside her. What becomes of a soldier when the war never leaves her? Months had passed since the mission in Eastern Europe, but Emma still carried it with her. Not the success, not the accolades that filled briefing rooms and after-action reports. What stayed was the hesitation, the moment her finger almost froze, the breath that almost failed, the silence that almost cracked. It haunted her more than any ghost she had carried before. But the world didn't see hesitation. The world saw perfection. Across bases, her name was etched into manuals, her shots replayed in training scenarios. New snipers learned not only to breathe like Emma, but to think like her, to wait like her, to turn silence into a weapon. She had become more than a soldier. She was doctrine. And yet, Emma herself lived in the margins. She drifted between missions, between units, never fully belonging anywhere. SEALs respected her, Rangers claimed her, Marines studied her, but she belonged to none of them. At night, she sat alone in temporary quarters, rifle disassembled across the table, cloth in her hands, silence in her chest. And always the ledger returned, the names of the saved, the faces of the lost. Some nights she wondered if she had traded her humanity for precision, if the myth of ghost had swallowed the woman named Emma whole. It was who finally broke through her silence. He found her back standing alone on the range where it all began. The desert sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire. Emma lay prone behind her, sighting at nothing in particular, her finger resting gently on the trigger guard. "You never stop, do you?" asked softly. Emma didn't look up. "If I stop, the ghosts get louder." He stood beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon. "Every operator carries ghosts. You think you're the only one." Emma's voice was quiet but edged with something sharp. "They didn't build legends out of you. They didn't make you the story. You can falter and be human. I falter once and the whole thing collapses." Was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Maybe you're right. Maybe they see you as more than human, but that's because you showed them what's possible, and possibilities don't erase the person who made them. They live because of you." Emma finally looked at him. Her eyes were tired but steady. "What if I don't want to be a legend?" "Then stop worrying about being one," said. "Legends aren't for you. They're for the people who needed to believe. You just keep breathing, keep shooting, keep carrying what you can." She let the words sink in. Slowly, she lowered the rifle, the scope drifting away from the horizon. For once, she didn't feel the urge to prove anything. In the weeks that followed, Emma stepped back from operations. Not forever, not in retreat, but in reflection. She began working quietly with younger snipers, not lecturing, not commanding, just sitting beside them, watching their form, correcting with a touch on the shoulder or a single word. She taught them patience, taught them silence, taught them that the rifle was not a weapon of glory but of responsibility. And sometimes, late at night, she told them the part no manual ever captured: the ghosts, the wait, the silence after the shot. She didn't tell them to avoid it. She told them to accept it, to live with it, to let it remind them that every bullet carried two stories, the one saved and the one taken. The students listened, wide-eyed, their notebooks open, their pens scratching down every word. But Emma knew the truth. They wouldn't understand until they lived it themselves. Because no one really understood silence until it followed them home. Her influence grew anyway, not because she wanted it to, but because truth always spreads. SEAL ranges stretched beyond their limits. Ranger manuals thickened with her corrections. Marines built entire courses around her patience drills. And through it all, Emma remained the same, quiet, steady, carrying her rifle like a weight and a companion. One evening, months later, she stood again at. The range was empty, the desert air cool, the wind flags snapping lightly. She lay prone behind her, sighting once more at the 1,500-meter mark. This time there were no spotters, no operators, no audience, just Emma, her rifle, and the silence. She breathed slow, steady. The world narrowed to her scope, her pulse, her trigger. Crack! The round screamed across the distance, striking dead center. Dust bloomed in the fading light. But Emma didn't smile. She didn't mark it on a board. She didn't need confirmation. Because she finally understood. The record had never mattered. The legend had never mattered. The silence did. It was in silence that she found control. In silence that she carried her ghosts. In silence that she made the impossible possible, not for herself, but for those who depended on her. She stood slowly, slinging the rifle across her shoulder. The desert stretched wide and endless before her, a canvas of possibility. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't boast. It doesn't ask for recognition. Sometimes dignity simply acts. And that was Emma's legacy. Not the records, not the legends, not the whispers in briefing rooms. It was the silence, the patience, the resilience of a woman who carried ghosts so others could live free of them. The world would remember her as the ghost who shattered limits. But Emma knew the truth. She was just a soldier who breathed, who waited, who acted when the world demanded the impossible. And sometimes that was enough.